Very first thing President Obama did on taking office was promise to close Guantanamo Bay. He warned it would take time, but weeks on, only one of its 245 prisoners has been released, and there's been no proposals for what will replace the military tribunals. Clive Stafford Smith is a human rights lawyer who represents some of its inmates. David Rivkin is a former legal advisor to the White House. What do they think should happen to those still being held there? Clive Stafford Smith, David Rivkin, welcome to Hard Talk.
Good to be with you.
David Rivkin, why is it taking so long to deal with those being held at Guantanamo?
Well, because these are difficult legal and policy questions. Contrary to a common perception, we do not have a couple of hundred of innocent shepherds or aid workers who've been improperly detained, and all you need to do is to let them go. We have a number of very dangerous people. Against some, we have reasonably good evidence, sufficient for their trial in the military justice system. Against many others, we have good evidence to detain them for duration of hostilities, however long they take, as enemy combatants. And in the last category, there are people who want to release. By the way, it's very important for your viewers to appreciate. There are dozens of people who want to release from Guantanamo. We cannot find good home for them because to send them back to their home countries, there's a chance they'll be tortured, and nobody else wants to take them. So these are just very difficult issues.
Clive Stafford Smith, you've argued in the past there are an awful lot you could just release pretty quickly.
Well, that's certainly true. Of the first 26 people we finally got into a real court, 23 of them we did prove innocent, and that includes, for example, Mohammed al-Ghorani, who was 14 years old at the time he was seized by the US. The US said that he was a member of the London cell of al-Qaeda. We proved he would have been 11 at the time. Now, he's from Chad. He could be home tomorrow. There are, on the other hand...
So why hasn't he been released?
Well, that's a good question, one that you should put to the US administration. We've pressed for it because Reprieve, my charity, works on his case. But David's right in the sense that there are other problems. There are refugees, and in those cases we need countries like the Europeans, quite frankly, to step up and agree to take refugees.
David Rivkin, when you heard President Obama say he would close Guantanamo Bay, did you immediately think America will be less safe as a result?
I find this to be a regrettable decision, but obviously I and other people in this country knew that that's what he was going to do. He promised it during the campaign. Quite frankly, at the risk of sounding like President Obama, I want to look forward and not backwards. What's important to me is not a particular location, although Guantanamo was a good location for many reasons. To me, what's important is what kind of legal architecture are we going to use on a going forward basis, and not just with regard to the 200+ people in Guantanamo. Remember, this is an ongoing war in Iraq and Afghanistan. We're going to be capturing hundreds and thousands of additional enemy combatants in that war. We're holding several thousand people in detention facilities in Afghanistan and Iraq. If we're going to treat everybody, as I suspect my good friend Clive wants, as criminal defendants, we cannot possibly win this war. If we're going to treat people as enemy combatants, I'm frankly fairly agnostic as to where they'll be kept and how much due process they get. But it's the question of what is the font of legal rules from which you're going to use here. Are they rooted in the laws of war paradigm because this is real war? Are they rooted in the criminal justice system?
What's the answer to that, Clive Stafford?
Well, the answer to that is if we throw out the rule of law as we have in Guantanamo Bay, we've already lost the battle because we've thrown out the very thing that makes America and the West fine. And
but what do you do with those in Guantanamo and those that are perhaps picked up on the battlefield, those in Guantanamo Bay who you do believe to be dangerous?
Well, we've dealt with that in Britain for the last 800 years, in America for the last 200 years. And so, for example, when the first World Trade Center bombing took place, attack on the same place by a group of people with the same insane ideas, we had a trial for them, and we've done that for a long time. I see absolutely no reason why we can't do that today.
If I can just cut in, Clive, this fundamentally exposes what I think is the deficiency of your overall conceptual approach. These people are not criminals. They're more than criminals. As a matter of fact, in 800 years of British history and 200+ years of American history, to which you've been referring, we have always, in time of war, which is a term of art, under international law, we use laws of war paradigm. It's not lacking in law, but it's a different paradigm.
The example, why can't you use the same approach as you do for the people who bombed the World Trade Center?
Very simple, Sarah, because in most instances, when you pick people on the battlefield in a foreign country, at least in our criminal justice system, the level of exactitude, the level of evidence, forensic evidence, and other evidence. You know, your listeners may have heard of CSI shows, CSI New York, CSI Miami. You are not going to be able to obtain that level of precision on a battlefield. And if you do that, if that's your hurdle, you're going to be releasing a bunch of people. You can't fight a war if you run a revolving door operation. You capture somebody and you release that person several months later. That is not how things work in war.
The trouble is that in all the years at Guantanamo, there hasn't been any case that has been brought to before the military tribunals successfully.
Well, that's not quite true.
There have been two cases, and they've already been sent home.
Right. But let me say this, the reason it took so long, and I certainly appreciate, I'm not impugning their motivations, because people like Clive and others have been waging a virtual warfare, or what I like to call lawfare, against the military justice system that the Bush administration chose to employ. So forgive me for saying it, it's a little strange having spent years trying to derail that system and then being surprised it took so long. But again, forget about Guantanamo. The real question is this: if we capture Osama bin Laden tomorrow in Pakistan or on Afghanistan side of a border, are we going to treat him as Jack the Ripper? We're going to treat him as a war criminal.
Let me put that to Clive Stafford-Smith. What is the answer to that?
The answer is very simple. The problem we have with the evidence that is hard to introduce in court today is the problem with torturing people. If you take the great example, Khalid Sheikh Mohammed in Guantanamo Bay, he could so easily have been tried under the regular rules of a court because, for goodness sake, he went on television and boasted about his involvement in the crime of 9/11. He went on Al Jazeera, not even, no one is contesting that he was waterboarded by the Al Jazeera journalists, so they could have just played that videotape. The problem we have now is a problem created by the US administration, the Bush administration, where they tortured people. That's a problem of their own making, and the reason that they don't want to see the inside of a real court is because they know that the people who will be on trial alongside Khalid Sheikh Mohammed are going to be the very people who did this torturing, and quite frankly, they need to be.
David Rifkin.
You're dismissing, very briefly, you're dismissing very conveniently the real problem. Yes, with regard to some people.
Let's go. I will go back to Clive Stafford-Smith on that, but just on the Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, since we've got to it, we do have this problem, whereas here's somebody who said he did it. He says he's the mastermind of 9/11, but we know that he has been tortured, and therefore there is a problem when it comes to prosecuting him.
Well, let me tell you, at least in the American legal system, which I'm quite familiar, just because somebody said on television, I did it, believe me, does not necessarily mean the person can be successfully convicted in a federal district court or state court. The problem we have is not, repeat, not that we have wonderful evidence that's been tainted by being coercively obtained. We basically have very little admissible evidence because, again, as a result of a revolution in the criminal justice system in my country, we made it very difficult for anybody to be convicted. Remember, if a glove does not fit, you got to quit. Lots and lots of DNA evidence, in various cases, and clever defense lawyers suppress it. You just can't do that. I don't know how it is in Britain on the continent, but it is virtually, again, forget Khalid Sheikh Mohammed.
Well, let's go back to that point, Clive Stafford-Smith, which was that if they brought in Osama bin Laden tomorrow and there was no torturing of him, how would you propose that he be treated by the judicial system?
Well, there are a large number of videotapes of Osama bin Laden going around saying the things he wants to do to the West and saying the things he has done to the West. And I'd love to have David on my jury if he's going to be one of these people who sees these videotapes where someone's boasting about
would you
crime.
treat him like Jack the Ripper? The point is, would you treat him like a criminal, or would you treat him as somebody who had been picked up in...
Of course I'd treat him as a criminal, for the simple reason that we exalt these criminals, which is what they are, by calling them soldiers. They want to be called soldiers. They want the attack on the World Trade Center to be viewed as an act of war. And we aggrandize them by doing that. What we should do is look at it and say that is a monstrous crime, like the attempt 10 years before, and we're going to treat you as criminals.
Do you think there is something...
Clive, forgive me. So, Clive, very briefly, in your view then, we glorified Hitler by treating him as a war criminal instead of treating him as a garden variety criminal.
He was put on trial, and he would have been put on trial if he hadn't killed himself. And what we did at Nuremberg is we had a very sensible, good system of justice, where in fact 35% of people were acquitted, and yet we held it up as the paradigm of what we should do.
Gentlemen, I'm going to interrupt here because we already know that although we know that President Obama wants to change things, we do know that since he has moved into the White House, he has authorized Predator missile attacks on Pakistan, which would suggest that certainly suggests that he doesn't see al-Qaeda as civilians, and therefore, because otherwise, therefore, he's guilty of a war crime. So he sees it as a military situation.
Well, of course, there is a military situation ongoing in Afghanistan. That's without doubt. The question is what we do with the people who committed the crimes in America on 9/11. We cannot create a whole new system, throw out, jettison our entire legal system because of that.